Matt Brown didn't set off to build his own solo newsletter business, but he fell into it after taking a buyout at Vox Media's sports site SB Nation during the height of the pandemic, a period when very few media companies were hiring. While his SB Nation beat covered all of college sports, Matt decided to niche down with his own newsletter, which was called Extra Points, to focus specifically on the business side of college athletics. This gave him the edge he needed to find a loyal audience, and he quickly scaled it up to thousands of readers. In my interview with Matt, we talked about why he left Vox Media, how he monetized his newsletter, and what made him want to sell it to a larger media company. Hi, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. Okay, let's jump into my interview with Matt. But first, let me tell you about my sponsor, Memberful. In the modern age of content distribution, a media business built on a single social platform or funded by advertising alone cannot be sustainable. Take full control and ownership of all things related to your business, your audience, and your brand by signing up for Memberful. Trusted by some of the web's most prominent independent publishers like Vox and The Dispatch, Memberful allows you to diversify your revenue stream so your business can weather the storms of the changing economic and media landscape. Memberful has everything you need to run a membership program, including in-house newsletters, private podcasts, custom branding, gift subscriptions, mobile pay, free and paid trials, referrals, and tons more. Plus, Memberful seamlessly integrates with tools you already use, like WordPress, MailChimp, and Discord. The perfect tool for independent publishers, large creators, media companies, and local news sites. Visit memberful.com/Simon Owens to get started with a free trial. I'll leave a link in the description below. Okay, now on to my interview with Matt. Hey Matt, thanks for joining us.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Simon.
So you run a cool newsletter about the business of college sports, but before we get into talking about that, let's talk a little bit about your background. So you actually come from a sports journalism background, and you even went to like traditional J school, right?
Oh, I didn't go to traditional J school.
Oh,
I've been a working full-time sports reporter now for the last, I think this is my 10th college football season, but I have a degree in political science, and my early jobs were I taught elementary school in New Orleans as part of Teach for America. I did a little bit of field organizing for some political campaigns. I did some HR work and kind of fell into journalism through the back door, which is I found as true for many other people working in the more creator space.
yeah. So you eventually went to work for SB Nation, which is owned by Vox Media. So they kind of just recruited, at least in the early days, kind of just like fans of individual teams, and then they had like individual team verticals across every college pro team. Was that how you kind of fell into it?
It was pretty close. They were looking for a full-time individual to help manage a lot of those team siloed specific places. And like our perfect candidate is somebody that has written before, and I had freelanced, covered high school sports. I've been in press boxes. I knew how that world worked, but also somebody that had some experience managing people, that had some experience teaching people and coaching them through editing. And so my weird professional background, where I had done a little bit of those things, made me more attractive for that you kind of unicorn level position. And I was running all of those individual contractor team sites for several years.
Oh, so you weren't like running a specific vertical, you were overseeing multiple verticals that were
I,
covering college sports.
yeah, I think by the time I left, we had maybe 93 individual sites covering college athletics, and me and then later a colleague ran those 93 sites.
Yeah, and SB Nation just was an interesting media site because it was doing this kind of localized approach to aggregate a larger audience. So, like, obviously, there are lots of people who watch the NFL or college sports and stuff like that. But by doing it by team basis, you could like build audiences on each of those verticals and then theoretically sell to both local advertisers and national advertisers. You were there for like 7 years, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. Huh?
yeah, that was the hope. It ended up the activation around local advertising never really happened, and part of that is because that team specific coverage is then rolled up into Vox Media, which that also has a lot of political coverage and cultural coverage. They ended up getting into food and real estate journalism, and so for them, it was more important to roll all of those ad sales into a unified technical stack where it would make Yes, we could make more money, or you would make more money on the sports side by trying to grab local clients in Dallas or in the college side, much more rural areas. But you would make more money as a company if you tried to unify everything as much as possible. So on the sports side, it really was more programmatic, scale driven than you might expect given what the verticals looked like.
Yeah, so they probably have like an ads team that was based in New York, so they were selling
Yep.
mainly to national advertisers. To sell to local advertisers, you probably need like a local sales staff, and obviously, a lean company like Vox Media is not going to be able to staff that way. And programmatic advertising, probably local advertisers aren't sophisticated enough to be doing kind of programmatic local targeted advertising. My guess
That
is.
yeah, that would be almost exactly it. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the major ad partners when I was there, you're typically looking at AAA, food and beverage, automotive, banking, and then you might partner with like an Outbrain or something that might, depending on your cookies, spit out something that's more local. But it really was a scale-driven enterprise. You find other college sports or other sports publishers are going after the local dollar a bit more.
Yeah, but even still, you would think that sports is non-controversial, it's brand safe. You would think that with the aggregate scale of all those verticals, they could have sold the same national advertisers that ESPN and other big sports publishers had, but that wasn't the case.
There was some of that in the very beginning, you're exactly right. Sports content is generally very brand safe. Part of the challenge is how competitive that particular sports space is, because SB Nation, unlike an ESPN or a CBS or a Fox, is not a rights holder. So you can't bundle in the actual broadcast of the games. You're not able to compete on access with some of those larger entities. And then we found that the space became more competitive, and if you were trying to sell community or hyper engaged audience, well, then Barstool moved in and ended up taking some of that audience. If you were trying to go on pure scale, as large as the SB Nation network became, to your point, Vox is pretty lean. There weren't a ton of full time people. There were some, but it wasn't a newsroom like the Athletic or the Ringer ever had, and so you couldn't compete on scale either. I mean, I believe what was happening over the several years when I was there is SB Nation's place in that market became less defined, and it made more sense for Vox to focus on the other parts of their portfolio that had a more established niche and target demographic within the ad world.
And then during the pandemic, when all those sports shut down, they used that as an excuse to kind of wind down a lot of SB Nation.
That's exactly what happened to me. Most of the college football team were offered buyouts, and I took mine the second it was possible because our staffing levels have been decreasing for a couple of years. But there's very few full-time individuals at SB Nation now. A lot of what a reader might remember from what the website was ended in April as the pandemic began to really cancel a lot of sporting events.
And so you took that buyout in summer 2020?
April of 2020, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So now we're going to start talking about what you did next. Did you have a plan when you left, or was it just like I'm probably gonna take my buyout, take my severance, and spend some time looking for a traditional sports job, or did you kind of know right away that you were gonna try to create your own business?
I wish I could tell you that Extra Points was the product of some like deeply held ideological yearning to be an independent and start my own business and everything. But, in April of 2020, when the world's kind of on fire, I felt like I didn't really have the luxury to plan ahead that much. There weren't any traditional sports media jobs because no media company was hiring. I'm based in Chicago, and I had always kind of thought, hey, if I get out of Vox Media, maybe I'll go work for the Sun Times. There's a bunch of exciting, independent, even some nonprofit media outlets here in town, and none of them were hiring either. And I wouldn't even been able to get a PR job because that whole section of the economy kind of shut down a little bit. So when I initially launched Extra Points, my thinking was very much, all right, I've got some severance, so I don't need to make a profit tomorrow. I have a little bit of money, but my plan B, plan C, and plan D all went up in smoke because every white collar job in the city outside of finance basically just shut down. So my only chance is to go into business for myself. I thought maybe I might do that for 6 months while I bought myself some time to go look for other opportunities, but I've been really blessed that Extra Points grew enough where it became apparent pretty early on. Actually, this was going to be my best chance.
So SB Nation was, I think, primarily focused on sports fans, but you decided to focus on a B2B niche within sports. specifically not just the business of sports. Like I've had, the people behind like front office sports on this
Yeah.
podcast. You focus on even a sub niche of that, which is the business of college sports. Why did you do that?
Yeah, so part of it is I began to realize at SB Nation that our sweet spot was generally going where the rest of the competition wasn't. I'm a graduate of Ohio State. That's probably the single most covered sports team anywhere in America. I want to say there's 40 people on that beat. Every press conference is packed. And there's very little that I could say X's and O's about Ohio State football that isn't going to be said by somebody else on that beat, especially because I haven't lived in Columbus since I graduated. But there's this whole other subset of college athletics, things that I'm interested in as a former educator and as the child of educators and someone that has diverse interests that isn't covered as much, whether that's business, whether that's higher education, whether that's policy, and how the college part fits into college sports. And there's been a couple of places that have covered this. Front Office Sports and Sportico and generalist sports business publications do it. The higher education press used to do it. They don't really do it as much anymore. And I've learned like these are the things I am really interested in, and it's an underserved niche. And is it going to reach 300,000 people? They're going to maybe read a story about what Alabama's quarterback had for lunch? No. But if I could monetize that smaller audience, then that might be sufficient. And that was what I hoped to test when I went to market.
And let's talk about what the business of college sports is. It's talking about sports arenas, like the tuition that's going towards sports, ticket sales at sports, sponsorship deals for sports teams, and we'll talk about the individual athletes in a second.
Yeah.
There are tons of intersecting. Like, how big is the sports section of any large college? Like compared to the entire academic campus versus the sports. Like that's a huge part of college, like the ecosystem, right?
Yeah, no, it's funny because if you look at the operating budget of a major, land grant flagship state institution where you have an athletic department that might have a budget of 150, $200 million, it's a big deal. Then you look at the operating budget and you see it's 10 billion, and you realize that even at my alma mater, which has the second or third largest athletic department in the country, it's small. But even though it's small compared to, say, the cancer research department or the totality of the liberal arts experience, in terms of its the interest that it will generate from the state house, from marketing brands, from the whole kind of political oxygen, it's enormous. Like this is the reason why so many of these schools and even East Coast selective institutions started programs to begin with because they realized this was the way that they could reach a segment of that is interested in higher education in a different way, but they can't reach through C-SPAN broadcasts. So there is an audience both on the B2B side, athletic directors, companies that work in athletic apparel or in broadcast rights or consultancies, they're all interested in this. Academics are interested in this, but unlike a lot of other B2B journals, there's still also a pretty large generalist audience out there that is intellectually aware that business issues and academic issues shape who is good and who can compete, but they don't really understand how everything fits together, and that's part of the audience I'm trying to reach.
Yeah, like if you're a hardcore Ohio State fan, you want to know something about the business of Ohio State because that'll affect player recruitment, player amenities, different stuff like that, which will impact the performance of the players themselves.
That's exactly right, and that's an extremely expansive beat. So, like, I'll give you an example here close to home, for someone that's not super in the weeds of college athletics. I'm based in Chicago. Historically, back in the heyday of Big Ten athletics in the 1950s and 1960s, Chicago was a major hub to recruit athletes. If you look at the NFL in the 60s and 70s, a ton of those players came from Cook County. They came from Western Pennsylvania. They came from Minneapolis. They came from the Great Lakes. As American population has shifted and more people have left the Midwest and moved to the Southeast, moved to the Sun Belt, those players then finish high school and think, well, I'm already in Jacksonville. Do I want to go sign up for winter in Michigan, or maybe do I want to go someplace a little bit warmer? And then here in Chicago, an urban school district that's faced enrollment challenges, that has difficulty securing stadiums, that has difficulty securing athletic directors within individual high schools, the enormous infrastructure you need to produce high level football doesn't exist here the same way that it does in Dallas or in Miami or in Salt Lake City or in parts of suburban Los Angeles. So this is a college football story. It helps explain why Alabama is good and why Michigan State hasn't been as good. But it's a political story, it's a higher education story, it's a demographic story, it's a K through 12 story. And that's hard to do if you're the reporter here at the Tuscaloosa, Recorder or something, and you have to go talk to Nick Saban tomorrow. That's the kind of story I can wrap my arms around a little bit more.
And since then, since you started, the Supreme Court ruled basically that college athletes can start accepting sponsorships and other kind of paid roles. Is that even a larger explosion of your beat now that, all the individual players are going to be touching the business side, sponsorships, marketing, all that kind of stuff is going to be a huge expansion?
Unquestionably, I make this joke often when I'm talking to potential sources because we live in interesting times, and sometimes we wish that we weren't working in interesting times quite as much because the last 2.5 years have been home to just an enormous amount of structural changes in college athletics. The expansion of name, image, and likeness was absolutely one of them. Every department in Division One, whether you're Ohio State, Ohio University, Youngstown State, or even below then, will need to now have some kind of staffer or some kind of plan to educate athletes about how to participate in this marketplace. Brands from AAA, national brands to Dino's Pizza in Warren, Ohio, are engaging in the sponsorship space, and so there's a lot to write about there. But we're also happening to your earlier point. The Supreme Court issued a very significant antitrust ruling about college athletics, and there's another major case working its way through federal court right now about whether college athletes should be considered employees and whether they should have access to collective bargaining and whether they should have access to workman's comp and be paid a minimum wage. We have other cases working their way through the federal court system that are re-examining Title IX and Title VII and how they impact college athletics. We have a ton of conference realignment, a ton of massive changes right now happening on the broadcast space, and then also a global pandemic where every college football writer also had to cosplay as a epidemiologist and figure out then, what are the implications and how schools prepare for this, and can you play tackle football while wearing a breathing mask and everything else. So it is a
And
good time.
The Supreme Court also ruled on sports gambling as
Um,
well, which
sure.
is
Which in another, I mean, that there's a gajillion more dollars that are floating into this marketplace too. So I
so you
have
entered
no
just at the right
shortage,
time. Yeah.
no short. Yeah, and candidly, I found that right after that the Alston case and NIL kind of became a bigger thing. That is also when I had a lot more interest in people trying to buy me, because then other, I think, both institutional publishers and private investors realized this man doesn't have a gigantic audience yet, but it's an engaged one. And suddenly we see a bunch of dollar signs. And so maybe partnering with Matt makes some sense. And so I think my timeline was accelerated a little bit in a way that maybe other independent publishers aren't.
Yeah, and we'll definitely talk about your acquisition a little bit. So you launch on Substack in 2020, right?
Yep.
And so you start on Substack, and your initial business model is just purely paid subscriptions. And you decided to test out, is there a market for this? And you wanted to get what, 100 paying subscribers to just kind of prove the model to start with?
That was exactly it. I mean, to go back, actually, I had launched on Substack, I think in 2019, but in a very different model. Like I was there, it was 100%, it was free. I was just writing twice a week. Everything I wrote on Substack in 2019 was aggregation and curation rather than original reporting. And I looked at that as, hey, let's experiment and learn a little bit more about newsletters because Vox Media is not doing that. Maybe that will help me with my career. And then so I had a small audience. I want to say I had maybe 1,100 free subscribers. It was definitely a side project.
That's a good base starter pack for a
Yeah,
newsletter.
it's not nothing. And I
Yeah.
know I was fortunate that I'm not famous. The joke was I wasn't even the most famous guy named Matt Brown who wrote about college sports, but I had something,
Yeah.
leading into this. But I got over 100 paid subscribers, I think, within 48 hours of flipping the switch and said, all right, I'm going to write 4 days a week. I'm going to give away two of them. Two of them are going to be paywalled. And that was what I needed to be able to go to my wife and say, all right, now we're looking at $1,000 a month. Um, let's try to grow this rather than maybe me go to work at the grocery store or try to bring in something else to go find some money.
Yeah, and that's something I don't really haven't written about in my newsletter or anything like that. Is like the convincing of the spouse.
Yeah.
I have this. You're giving up this full time income. Is your time like you have this dream? do you spend all your time pursuing a new full-time job, or how do you convince your spouse that they, if they support the family for a certain amount of time, that there's like a real business here and real potential? So I think that's like a thing that a lot of, creators, they have to kind of wrangle with.
It's massive, and I don't think I would have ever been able to do this to put myself in a position that I'm in now if this was a 20-hour week commitment or a 15-hour week commitment, because it's not just about writing. It's about selling, it's about brand building, it's about tech. I mean, I put in well north of 50 hours a week, and I wasn't able to do that 9 to 5 because I have two
Hmm.
small children and my
Yeah.
wife's doing things, but yeah, that support and that wiggle room was instrumental.
So tell me about that first year. What were like, how quickly were you able to scale up? I think you eventually kind of started seeing a slowdown in subscription growth, stuff like that. Tell me about that first year of how did you build your audience?
Yeah, it was up and down. I wish I could say that it was this linear progression, which I don't think is the case for most independent publishers. It kind of zigzags a little bit, which is terrible for your mental health because when you look at that stupid chart every day and you're like,
Yeah.
I wish it was going up,
Yeah.
especially when you kind of need the money. Um, Part of the challenge in scaling was one, this was during a summer where there was no college football. College football started a little bit later and in a very truncated and you know abbreviated way. We didn't have a season that way that people would typically expect until the year later because of COVID, and so that sapped interest, and higher education didn't really have the interest in spending a lot of money. And then also just very practical, right? Because like I said, I had two small children. I'm in Chicago. Chicago public schools mostly shut down. You're doing things remote. A lot of the other supporting infrastructure you think about being a working parent or just being in society in 2020 wasn't working. So like I'm doing my best to build this business, but then I'm also teaching first grade, and I'm also I have to move heaven and earth to go to the grocery store and make all these other changes. So I felt like I was really operating with one arm tied behind my back. So the growth was happening. I want to say I closed the first year with subscription revenue close to $40,000 for the first fiscal year, which was not as much as I was making at Vox, but for 1 year, not
It's
bad.
pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, but once some of those structural barriers were moved, it was much easier to grow more.
Yeah, so schools start opening back up. You're no longer teaching first grade, and then you eventually decide to start kind of diversifying your revenue, right?
Yeah.
Well, first you move off Substack.
Yeah, I moved off Substack after about a year, and I'll explain why there, because Substack, for some reasons that are their fault and some reasons that are not their fault, I think has become a bit of a polarizing company within the writer community. And for one, like I had a good relationship with them. They gave me a fellowship, they gave me some extra training, they gave me some upfront capital, which was really useful in the beginning, and I deeply appreciated it. What I found after a year, though, was that I was increasingly convinced I wasn't the best use case for the kind of publication that would really benefit from Substack. And by that, I mean, part of it is Substack gets expensive when you are making most of your money through paid subscriptions relative to the quality of tech product that you get. And, so I was looking at this like, is this service worth $450 to me? Now remember, this was before the Substack app. This was before Substack was a meaningful, funnel for growing subscriptions. It was before a lot of their audience segmentation features were built in. It was just like this is 3 times as much money as what the other places are on the market. The other difference is you're right. I was diversifying my income. I sold ads, which Substack did not prohibit, but they certainly didn't go out of their way to make very easy. I sold merchandise. I sold T-shirts. I had a partnership with a vintage collegiate apparel company that both made shirts and advertised with me. I sold some stickers, and because it wasn't a permanent landing page, and you have to throw in the links every time that you sign up the newsletter, it wasn't terribly efficient. The other thing that I did as a reporter that's really important to me is public records disclosures. Fun thing about writing about college athletics that's not true about writing about professional sports is most of this stuff you're working with state actors, which means you could FOI with them. So you can
Yeah.
get direct budget breakdowns. You can get the PDF of the contract. So I have a huge landing page of, hey, here's the itemized athletic budgets for 260 schools, and I have it broken down by year. Here's what all of these football scheduling agreements look like. Here's what all of these shoe deals with Under Armour and Adidas look like, which has been a really important resource for graduate students, for other reporters, and it's free because like, hey, this is the public's documents. Like I'm not gonna paywall these, like, with very few exceptions. And you couldn't do that on Substack. There was no easy way to have a landing page or to host documents, and you just have to kind of throw them into every newsletter and then tweet them when you wanted to reference them. So I'm like, all right, I need a web page. I need someone that does X, Y, and Z. So I moved to Ghost, which for other people, I would still say, hey, Substack makes the most sense, and it's a different product now than when I used it, but it was the right move for me based on the kind of company I was trying to build.
So for paid subscribers, let's talk about like what that pie is. So it's everybody who works in the athletic department of a school. It's people who work at the school but maybe are making determinations about enrollment
Yeah.
or budgetary issues. You have all the B2B companies that service athletic departments that give them apparel, equipment, stuff like that. Potential sponsors, especially now that they're sponsoring athletes. And then you have this like hardcore set of sports fans that are so hardcore that they actually want to know about the business behind. So is that kind of in terms of like who you're paying subscribers, is that a good like breakdown?
It's close. It's pretty close. So I tell folks my paid sub falls into three buckets. And one of those, you're right, I would broadly categorize as industry. And that's, you're right, people that work in athletic departments, not just big athletic departments, but medium and small ones too. And then people that work in affiliated industries. A lot of that is in broadcast media. A lot of that is in athletic apparel. There's some of that is in what we call multimedia rights, like a Learfield or a JMI, people that help sell like billboards and ads and like school programs and stuff. These people, and then increasingly people that work in the name, image, and likeness industry, people that are helping broker deals between athletes and brands, fall into that category. They pay. Some of them pay for multiple subscriptions because they can write it off as like a continuing education expense. Wonderful. You're right. My second group, what you mentioned there, the term that I think I've used when talking to you, and I said this to other people, and it's with the deepest love in my heart. It's no pejorative connotation whatsoever. They're giant nerds. They tend to be affluent. They tend to be educated. These are the people that have a lot of link karma on Reddit. Like they're really deep into the message boards. And if I say like, okay, I have a story here about what the University of Indianapolis might do with their future league affiliation in the Ohio Valley Conference, they're going to read it. God bless them. I don't know how big that audience can scale because they're a little bit harder to find, but they're there. The third segment that you didn't mention that I am excited about and I kind of fell into are students who are studying sports management, sports business, sports law, and sports media. Because a lot of these college classes, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, do not have textbooks. This industry evolves so quickly that they go out of date quite a bit. Many of them are teaching multiple courses, and so trying to build a curriculum themselves becomes a challenge. And we've been able to find, hey, we'll give you a discount on extra points. You buy 45 subscriptions for all of your students. I come talk to your class, and you can use this as a supplement to what you're talking about as you're exploring sports law and sports sponsorship. And that's gotten big enough to the point where we've now, like, after I got acquired, we hired a full-time salesperson to help push that, and we think that could become a $500,000 business, just on that little segment alone. So that has grown every couple of months and something we're really excited about.
Yeah, and I've talked to other publishers that have gone that route of usually not through the departments themselves, usually through like the college library systems and stuff like that, but selling subscriptions at the institutional level, licenses for hundreds of people at once. So then it does make sense to hire like a commission-based salesman to go from to and work through this sales cycle because you're getting a lot every time you sell one of these licenses. It's a lot of revenue.
Yeah, the challenge, I mean, like that would be the perfect world. And I know a couple of publishers have done this. The challenge, and I think anybody that's listening to this that has done any work at government or public institutions knows, it's a gigantic sales cycle. And it might take you 90 days or 120 days to get paid. If you're selling into a library system, you got to get three different people to do it. And sometimes, like I've joked, even the governor, which maybe in Wyoming, but it's not something where I can just call somebody up. So on my level, it's been mostly working with professors. But if I get four professors to advocate and buy in for what I'm doing, and I know the athletic department reads it, yeah, in a perfect world, you say, I don't care about having to shake down, or keep writing 20-year-olds to remind them to pay for their textbook. I'd much rather the school pay me $7,000 for a subscription. And anybody that's able to actually do this, that's a very good business to be in.
So the professors they're buying the subscriptions, or they're just as they assign the sale of textbooks, they assign your newsletter as a Part of the curriculum.
It's both. And I tell folks I would much prefer you pay for it and I'll cut you a deal on it so we can have it on one credit card and we don't have to worry about churn or spend as much time logistically managing that. But if that's not an option and you want to assign it like you would a textbook, I will make sure that it's way cheaper than that textbook. I mean, a semester with me is $16 for a student or $12 for a student instead of 75 for a paperback they're going to sell back. And then we work to get that adopted as much as possible.
What about your advertisers? Who wants to advertise in your newsletter?
I've been very upfront about this. This has been a big challenge. And I think part of that is because I fit into a little bit of a donut in the digital marketing world. For a lot of newsletters, I think your typical advertiser is a reader of the newsletter, and you're able to advertise within the newsletter itself to go find those sponsors, and that's a more efficient cycle. And because of our readers are often people that either don't work in college sports or students, like they're not people who are selling sponsorships, so that becomes a little bit more challenging. We've sold ads and have had a lot of success with other publishers because we've been able to say, we have a 5-figure, highly engaged audience that reads newsletters. They love Extra Points. Many of them will probably like Morning Brew. Many of them will probably like your political analysis website. We've had some success with health and like performance supplements, or athletic greens or vegetarian or health conscious food. Many people here are involved in athletics. They like exercising. They would rather not eat hot pockets if so. A brand there. But a lot of the direct to consumer goods that would make sense for my audience, educated, affluent male, 20 to 40, a lot of those are looking for scale that I can't deliver to the point where then it doesn't really make sense for me to kind of to break my neck and spend all this time, shepherding a $250 ad buy. And many of the other companies that would benefit enormously, graduate programs, people promoting academic conferences, other companies that are trying to, willing to pay a premium to reach an audience of like 80 athletic directors. That's a longer sales cycle, and it requires an expertise and an infrastructure that, as a mostly solo guy, I can't really do as well. And
Yeah.
so, even I would love to have a more balanced revenue flow system. Right now, probably 85% of my revenue comes from subscriptions. I would love it if it was 60/40, but I haven't found a tool or a system. And hey, if you're listening to this and you got some ideas, I'm at matt@extrapointsmb.com. I'd love to talk to you. But I haven't found a system that works really well yet. And I don't have the time to call 60 brands a week necessarily.
Yeah, like one thing I wrote a newsletter about recently is people were asking what hole isn't being filled in the newsletter advertising market. There aren't newsletter advertising agencies. Like there are newsletter advertising marketplaces where that help pair brands together. But like you look at like podcasts or YouTube and other kind of creator like mediums, there are like full-time agents who take a cut of revenue who have like dozens or hundreds of clients, and their job is just to go out there and find you sponsors and go through that long sales cycle, and they represent you, and then they don't get paid until you get paid. But there's not like as far as I know, there might be an advertising agency out there that specializes in newsletters, but they're not super famous, and there's not a lot of them. So like that's what you need is you need someone who is aggregating a bunch of sports publishers and representing them as an agent and going out there and finding you sponsors.
If something like that exists, I would love to talk to them. I know that. I mean, I use SwapStack, which is
Yeah,
an entity.
which
I
is a
know
marketplace. Yeah,
it's a marketplace. You've written about
mm-hmm.
that before,
Yeah,
and that's where I run my house ads, and I have mostly positive things to say about them. But I also recognize that, like any marketplace, whether that's athletes or publishers or other things, finding a highly engaged audience and user base is hard. A lot of the brands that are on market on like SwapStack haven't logged in 3 weeks. I'm sure that's the
yeah.
same thing for publishers. And they're also over indexed in one or two industries. So if I was a crypto newsletter, I would not have this problem. There are plenty of people that are willing to advertise, talk about Web3. I don't take their money. If I was looking to take sports book money, which is just flooded the zone for sports, I would be okay too. And I made the editorial decision to not accept gambling money. I think that undermines my editorial independence and my audience. If I was to accept a DraftKings, if somebody else wants to do that, that's great. But yeah, if there was a service out there to make that more efficient in exchange for a cut of revenue, I would be very interested in it. I think a lot of it is either tied to the very top end of the marketplace, or trying to help somebody who's not as far along as I am.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you eventually got acquired. What was so to walk me through that?
Yeah. So after that first year, at Extra Points, I came to a conclusion. I think one of the things I'm good at is I'm pretty self-aware. And I recognize, I'm a good reporter. I'm not an elite reporter. I'm not the most connected guy in the world because I haven't been doing this as long. But I'm a good reporter. I'm a good writer. And I'm interested in business development and I'm interested in learning more about these things. But I also understand that I am not going to be good enough at ad sales and tech stack and web development and writing and reporting and audio and do all those things and also be an engaged husband and like a good father and somebody that's healthy. I can't do all of those things. And so, in order for this to really grow the way that I think it can, I need help. And I was getting interest from other investors and I turned down people that offered more money because I was looking for somebody that had expertise that could do some of the things that I wasn't as good at. I talked to people involved with many legacy sports publications. I talked with a lot of private investments and investors and people that were trying to get into the NIL business or the event space business, and some of those went pretty far along. But the one that made the most sense was a company called D1 Ticker, which is headquartered in Louisville, Kentucky. They were people that I had known informally for several years, and that's a slightly larger B2B, explicitly B2B college sports publication. But they don't do original content. Like they are one of the rare, still functioning like clipping services. Like we used to have before the internet, where people would mail you like here's what was in at WSJ and here was in the newspapers all across the country. That's still working, and they've built a very strong audience but they needed original content and they needed somebody who had some subject matter expertise. So that made for a really productive partnership.
Yeah, like every now and then I stumble across one of these Web 1.0 old school media companies that are still thriving or still doing okay,
Yeah.
just a solid business, and that's what this is. It's just literally just like kind of doing Google News but a more specialized version of it, of just aggregating clippings and sending them by email every day, right?
But twice a day by email, and there's a huge job board that's attached to it. And if you are trying to find an administrator in college athletics, like this is the number one classified service that you use, which is a good business, and it's a matured business, and it's a sustainable business. But it could be much bigger if it added into other things. And so acquiring me, and then also getting into the video space, we're part of those. So I feel like I have the best of both worlds because I still have like almost complete editorial autonomy. I still decide what is published on Extra Points. I am financially incentivized to grow Extra Points, but somebody else helps pay for some of my expenses, and somebody else can make my editorial product better because they are connected in parts of this industry that I wasn't, or that I couldn't become as connected with because I was stuck in my Chicago basement instead of going to every conference over the last 3 years.
And like, what are the synergies there? Is it just another revenue stream for them, or are you helping them to sell subscriptions or get job classified ads, or like, are there any kind of
Yeah.
like cross promotional synergy there?
There's a couple of different things. So one of the new entities that they've built is they've partnered with an executive search firm and a web technology company to build a service called Collegiate Sports Connect, which is basically a secondary private LinkedIn just for college sports. So if that way, if you're looking for say a new ticketing director at UNLV, beyond just buying the one little banner ad in the newsletter, you might engage with this service. And we produce content for that service. We do video interviews with talking through job openings or talking to stakeholders or getting expert analysis, and that lives on that platform. So I help produce content for that. I'm one of the. It's funny to say this as somebody like isn't a capital J school journalism guy, but I have more of a pure media background than many of the other folks there. So I've been able to help with some editing and help with building this video in other places. And then they're helping grow not just Extra Points, but then this unified service that we're calling D1 Classroom, which kind of builds off that idea of using Extra Points as a curriculum supplement. And now it's saying, hey, we've got the Collegiate Sports Connect over here, which can help students find jobs. We've got the original content analysis educator person in Extra Points. And then Matt will write discussion questions for you about what's happening in the news using D1 Ticker. So you don't have to write all of your curriculum. If you want to figure out what am I going to talk about with my class today about sports law, well, here's the three big sports law stories, and here's something you can ask your 100 level, and here's something you can ask your graduate students. Roll that all up. It's a compelling product, and we all get a little piece of that.
And how is the acquisition, other than giving you a bit, probably a nice lump sum of money, how is it improving extra points?
Well, the D1 ticker people have been involved in the college athletic space for I think about a decade. The founder worked in the industry, and the principals have worked in the industry for a long time. So they know a lot of people that I don't know. I'm decently connected, but there's 328 Division One institutions to say, and another 600 in Division Two or Division Three. Do I know every athletic department of rural Pennsylvania or like Northern California? I don't. It's funny. Even the degenerate like me comes along every probably a couple times a month. I'm like, I have never heard of that school, and they might have that person's phone number, or they can vouch for, and or have subject matter expertise. They're able to help with some of the initial investments that are needed to build something like D1 Classroom, to build something like travel. So I'll give an example. The first football game that I covered, and I only do a couple of these a year now, after the pandemic, was a game between UConn and UMass. If you're a casual college football fan, you might know that those two teams suck. Last year, I mean, in the year that I went, this was 2021, they were the two worst teams in the country. And the whole point of going there was like, we're gonna go, we're not gonna laugh at anybody, we're gonna talk to and find why would you spend your beautiful fall Saturday at Amherst, Massachusetts, watching these two objectively horrific football teams participate, play against each other? What are you getting out of it? What is your mindset, right? And talk to the coaches, like, and the ads. What are you hoping to possibly gain from this? Because you're never going to be Ohio State. You're never even going to be Boston College. Why are you spending $35 million a year on this whole thing? And my expense was $800 to go there and rent a car to drive from like Danbury, Connecticut or whatever to get up to the middle of nowhere, Massachusetts, and make the trip. And as a solo person, if you're only making $40,000 a year, like that kind of freelance trip and that reporting gets really expensive. And if you've got kids, like you're hesitant to make that kind of investment. When you have another publisher, somebody that's saying, am I going to do this for everything you want to pitch? No. Every editor needs to save the reporter from themselves. Can I provide the infrastructure so you can get this subscription or go to this conference or experiment with this thing? And that's been enormously helpful.
Interesting. So I've written in my newsletter, and I think this is how we actually connected because you
Yeah.
responded to it. Giving advice to laid off journalists to launch their own media companies. Either at the whether getting laid off at the local newspaper level or the national level. My advice is to find other laid off journalists and kind of form a kind of like writer collective so that you can kind of work with each other and hopefully together be able to scale up a company much faster. But obviously, there are a lot of journalists who are launching their own solo media companies, kind of like what you're doing. Do you think you serve as kind of a model for someone who might want to do that, who might be facing a layoff and another, gruesome job search, and they might want to maybe launch something like Extra Points, maybe subsidize it with some freelancing? What are your kind of thoughts on looking at you as a model for that?
I think about this a lot, and I've talked to a lot of sports writers and a couple of folks in non-sports industries about my experience. I look back on and think there were some mistakes that I made, and I hope that maybe somebody else would do things differently. And I also recognize that there are things about what I did that I think are scalable and repeatable, and things that are not. I have the advantage of writing about something where uh, my audience is more likely to pay for it because many of them can have their employers pay for it. My audience tends to be wealthier. And even though my content's super niche, college football is really popular. It's by every metric, either the second or third most popular sport in the United States, and it's on primetime television, and it is a objectively very huge business. If I was writing about, say, DCI marching bands or about collegiate swimming exclusively or something more niche, I wouldn't say it's impossible, but it's a challenge. I will say, I think, yeah, this is something that you and I had discussed earlier. It gets much harder, I think, to make it something like this sustainable the more people that you bring in. So like when I was laid off originally, a lot of my colleagues were, and our original thought was, hey, let's try to do something like the defector people are doing. Like I don't think that had quite launched yet, but it was other reporters knew that was what they were trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
We have the writers, we have many of whom have strong audiences. Like we can get 8 or 9 people together and let's do this. And what we found was, after taking meetings with some technology companies and talking to nonprofit newsrooms and everything else, unless you can get someone to front you a bunch of money, it's most cases that you can't really do it because it's going to take you a long time to go build that audience, right? Like, it took me a year and a half to build an audience that would really financially support me. And if we added in 5 or 6 other people or 7 to 8 other people, many of whom don't have that same audience that I did, I was probably the third most famous person in those meetings, which is not a good sign. It's a challenge. When I would talk to nonprofit or civic oriented, local newsrooms, the feedback I got every time was, you can't save everybody. And it's way easier to start a city specific newsroom with 2 or 3 people and scale up than it is 8 or 9 people, and kind of launch from there. So, and the other thing that I think is unique about me, for good or for ill, is that I am so damn stubborn and embraced the idea of running a business immediately, and not didn't never just self-identified as a writer, in part because I never really had that luxury. The idea of me like saying I got to spend 15 hours this week cold calling people to sell ads or to sell bulk subscription packages and lean into being a brand was not something that I shied away from. And not every writer can do that because they're really different skill sets. So like I hope that somebody out there is like, I have some expertise, I have something different, I have an underserved market. I'd love to talk to you. There may be a pathway forward. But I also had some advantages and wired a way that I recognize not everybody is.
I mean, I guess I want to push back on it and take the kind of opposite tack. Is that so? One thing that creators run into as a big problem is just creating momentum. And as a solo creator, it's so much harder to create that momentum to generate enough volume of content while you're also playing all those other roles of marketing, building the business, also just having days you have to take off because you're teaching first grade
Yeah.
or you have a doctor's appointment, stuff like that. Whereas if you're going in with like 4 or 5 people, you can, decrease your content output, but the site itself will continue to put out new content because other creators are in there, so that you can take a half day off to meet with advertisers or to strategize on subscriptions or produce a higher volume. Like another thing with subscriptions, it's hard for a solo creator to create enough value of by creating both free content and paid content to make a subscription worth it. And so it's just so hard to get people to convert from free to paid because they're like, oh, they're getting one extra paid newsletter a week. Is that really? A lot of them are like, well, I can get thousands of articles from the New York Times for my subscription. Why am I paying you $100 a year for one extra article per week? So there's like some kind of synergy things there that, from a writer collective point of view, where I think you could possibly scale up the business faster than if you were doing it alone.
It's always going to depend on who the writers are and what the market is, but I think the math remains a major challenge. Like one
Mm-hmm.
thing that I have found from my readers, and I've asked about this a lot because I remember when I launched, I thought like similar. Hey, the New York Times is only $7 or $8, or Netflix is $9 a month. So by God, I have to just baptize people with content. And my newsletters at launch were mostly 2,000 words of original reporting.
Yeah.
And what I heard back from my audience was, Matt, this is all great, but I don't have time to read all this. And when you went to daily, because you felt like that pressure to provide more value, you actually were providing less value because we couldn't engage with it. Like the reason we pay for this is not because the New York Times doesn't give us a better price point like of dollar per article. Of course they do. They have scale, and no newsletter can compete with that kind of scale. What I'm offering is something that won't be written on the New York Times, or won't be explained the same way, or won't be as funny, or won't be as engaging with the New York Times. I think even if you make a writer collective, 1 person, 5 people, 7 people, you're playing a losing game in the news or journalism publishing world because you're competing against the Washington Post, the New York Times, and a couple of gigantic tech companies that will kick your ass on scale every single time. You are right, and I think for blogs, for non-newsletters, I think what you're talking about is exactly right. Where volume, where you're publishing multiple times a day, is more important. So I think it's a little bit different for newsletters. And then the math with every additional name you bring on there, unless they all are supplementing with freelance income, increases significantly. Like I look at
Yeah.
this, I don't mind sharing this. Like I think a little over 2 years into it, Extra Points is a independent publishing success. It is by objective measures one of the larger ghost newsletters. It's one of the largest independent sports related newsletters anywhere. It's broken stories, been on Washington Post, been in the New York Times, been in these other places, and it generates over 6 figures of revenue a year. I am not rich by any means. My wife still works, but it's good money. It's more money than I made at Vox. It's not even close to enough money to sustain 2 people, to
Yeah.
two full time people. And if I had a second person, I wouldn't hire a writer. The other thing that I think sometimes gets forgotten is that there's a lot of hidden costs here. If you're doing original reporting, you need a lawyer. And if you, in my experience, when I was shopping for liability insurance when it was just me or just me and like one other freelancer, I would have never been able to afford it. It was way too prohibitively expensive. And so that would have changed the kind of work that I was able to do, even establishing myself as like a two-person LLC. Like our attorney said, like this will not protect you. So that is a big issue. I do a lot of my reporting that involves FOIA and open records requests. Sadly, are often not free to file, and we've had to have attorneys on retainer to help us fight through some of those things. So even if you're not traveling a lot, even if you don't have to pay for your own insurance, there's more costs here than just whatever you're paying for Substack and Stripe and Ghost and Namecheap and some of those things. So just a two-person writer collective, man, you got to get like 3,000 paid subs or some really big advertisers to do it. And so you got to ask yourself, with every new person you're bringing in that collective, can that person scale? And then if you're bringing in a copy editor or somebody who's behind the scenes who's not going to drive subscriptions, does that do it? It's a different math. I'm not saying it can't work anywhere. I'm just
Yeah.
from my experience and from looking around, it is hard to do.
Yeah, and to buttress your point a little bit is like, even under the best case scenario, it would take 6 to 12 months before you're even making like decent revenue. How many times are you going to find five separate people, middle class people who were just laid off from their jobs,
Yep.
who can spend 6 to 12 months getting virtually no revenue? Um, going. That's why, like, in my idea that I did my newsletter, is you should start with a crowdfunding campaign to try to see if you can reach a minimum number of subscribers using your combined brands going forward. So at least you have like a very small. Obviously, it wouldn't replace your salary, but you have like a very small base of pay. But your point is well taken in terms of the more mouths you have to feed, the more you have to scale up even quicker in order to pay all those people.
Yeah, I mean, I used to live in DC. I remember how expensive rent is. Like that's part of why I live in the Midwest now. I remember how expensive, it's like, $6 gas for a long time, right? Every little thing adds up. And for some people, I think what you described would work really well. I was fortunate when I was laid off. I had 13,000 Twitter followers, and I had something. If I was the local education reporter for the Chicago Tribune, my work may be more influential or important to the public need, and there may be a market that will pay for it. But your audience that knows about you and knows your name and has that kind of connection with you might be dramatically smaller. So yeah, there's no magic solutions or like one size fits all kind of solutions because markets differ a lot. But yeah, I was unique in like not only did I get 35 grand in severance, but I have been saving for this exact event for well over a year because this isn't a state secret. I was pretty unhappy at Vox Media and was looking to leave, and COVID kind of ended the situation for both of us to break up. That's not the standard for most people. It's 1 month goodbye and good luck, and it's hard to bet on yourself.
Yeah. Okay, Matt. Well, those are all the questions I have for you. Where can people find you online?
You bet. If you want to talk newsletters, I would love to talk to you. I can be found at matt@extrapointsmb.com. That's my email. The newsletter, Extra Points, can be found at extrapointsmb.com. And I am probably spending too much time on Twitter at mattbrownep.
All right, that's a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.